What did I read last week? Do-do-do-do. What did Comics Kid 2099 read last week? Last week I read a whole bunch of stuff. I guess I'm kind of making up for not reading that much the week before. Pretty much everything that I read was Superman related, so let's just go ahead and get right into it, starting with Superman Emperor Joker. This story, unfortunately, is not very good. The premise here is that the Joker somehow has Mr. Mixius Spitlick's powers, and he has turned the world topsy-turvy. Right is left, up is down, etc. The world is very strange. Superman has been greatly depowered, but not completely depowered, and he is an inmate at Arkham Asylum, and every night he escapes only to be brought back to Arkham Asylum, where Solomon Grundy is the warden, by the world's greatest superhero and leader of the JLA, Bizarro. And Lois Lane, she is the head of Lane Corps, and she is ruthless and doesn't care about anyone. She is pretty much a female Lex Luthor. For some reason, the Joker has combined Lex Luthor and Lois Lane in this world. We don't even find out that Joker is behind all of this until like the end of the third issue of this book, which that was kind of a big reveal when this was coming out, because at first they weren't calling the storyline Emperor Joker. They were calling it Superman Arkham. And then by the end of the third issue, or the beginning of the fourth issue, I think they were calling it Emperor Joker. But when you're reading it in trade, you very obviously know that the Joker is behind all this, because the story is called Emperor Joker, and he's right there on the cover. So reading those first few issues, which are basically just there to kind of establish this world and set everything up, it reads a little slow because you know who the bad guy is, but they're playing coy with you and they're not showing you who the bad guy is. Also, this story is very frustrating because the Joker is all-powerful. He has the powers of a god, and somehow Superman, who has no powers at the beginning of the story, or has very little power comparatively speaking, he is somehow able to rise up and defeat the Joker, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, you could argue that the Joker doesn't want to be in the status quo, that he doesn't want to have the powers of the god. At one point, he even asks Superman, he says, "Kill me, get it over with and kill me now," except that this is the Joker we're talking about. I don't know if he's trolling Superman or if he actually doesn't want to have these powers and he's looking for an easy way out. If he is looking for an easy way out, as soon as Superman decides not to kill the Joker goes right back to being crazy and evil. So I don't think that that's the way that this book is being written. There's another moment in this book where I was like, oh, this is a really interesting take on the Joker. At one point, Joker says he is going to extinguish all life in the universe, and Harley Quinn is kind of saying, hey, why are you doing this? And he says he wants to make sure that there are no other people like him, no other crazy people like him. That's a really interesting take on the Joker, and again, I don't know if we can take him at his word or if he's lying through his teeth because he's crazy and he does that sort of thing. All in all, this story is co-written by Jeff Loeb, and Jeff Loeb is not the best writer. I'm not one of those people who likes to pile on Jeff Loeb. A lot of people just really like to relentlessly tear into everything he's ever written. I think that he's done some really good stories, and then he's also done some not so good stories. I don't think that subtlety was ever one of Jeff Loeb's strong suits, and so I don't think that he was going for the idea here that the Joker has tried to make Superman just a little bit powerful so that he can rise up and tear down this world that he has built. I don't think that that was what Jeff Loeb and Joe Kelly were going for here. I think this is just not a very good story. I don't think that it's very well written. Maybe you could argue that the Joker created this little flaw in the Matrix so that it could all be torn down and then he wouldn't be the god of this universe. Maybe you could argue that, except I feel like if the Joker really didn't want to be the emperor of this universe, then he would have done something himself. I don't think that he would have made Superman the trump card in this little universe and given him the power to tear it all down if he really didn't want it to be there. I think he would have just done it himself. So that story, not very good in my opinion. The next one that I read is Supergirl Book 1 by Peter David. Most of the art here is by Gary Frank. There are a couple of other artists here. There is one issue that I believe was done by Brett Blevins, and it's done kind of in a DC Animated Universe style, and I really like that issue a lot. But if you like Gary Frank, he has done some more recent stuff like Superman Secret Origin, Superman and the Legion of Superheroes, both of which were drawn by Jeff Johns. He did Batman Earth 1, Volumes 1 and 2, also written by Jeff Johns. I guess he just works with Jeff Johns a lot. But if you like Gary Frank's artwork, this is some of his early art from the mid 90s, the later half of the mid 90s, and I really like this book a lot. I had no idea what I was getting into with this. I had heard that this was a weird time for Supergirl, but really, once you get past the status quo in the first issue, it's really not that weird. It's pretty easy to follow. Basically, if you're familiar with Supergirl from the late 80s, very early 90s, circa Superman Exile, around that time, Supergirl was a shape-shifting alien. At one time, she was allied with Lex Luthor, and she was living with the Kents at one time. She is called the Matrix. That is the name of this alien, or May for short. And she basically goes to save this girl's life, and this girl's name is Linda Danvers. And if you're familiar with the pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths continuity, Supergirl's secret identity was Linda Danvers. So the Matrix, the shape-shifting alien, she finds this girl who is dying. Her name is Linda Danvers, and she absorbs her memories and part of her life force, and basically she is now half Matrix, half Linda Danvers. And so now she has a secret identity as Linda Danvers. Her parents, Linda's parents, do not know anything about Supergirl, or, well, they know that Supergirl is a superhero, but they don't know anything about her connection with their daughter. They don't know that their daughter is technically dead. Then you have the Kents and you have Superman. They don't know that Supergirl has now absorbed the life force of Linda Danvers. So she's kind of got two different secret identities, and there are people in both lives who don't know everything about what's going on with her, but they think that they do. And basically, she relocates to this small town where Linda Danvers was from, and there's lots of weird stuff going on here. There's this Satanist named Buzz. At one point, when he introduces himself to Linda's parents, he calls himself Buzz Aldrin, but that's kind of a running joke. I don't think that that's his real name, but his name is Buzz, and he's a very interesting character. In fact, all of the characters here are interesting characters. Every single supporting character in this book is very fascinating, and I'm very interested in seeing more done with all of these characters. But even someone like Buzz, who is the closest thing to an overall villain in this entire book, at one point in the book, he's kind of acting in a way where you would think that being a bad guy, he wouldn't act in this way. And you still see that he has something up his sleeve, but it's very interesting seeing these characters evolve and change. Just very early on, we're getting to see some of these characters do stuff, and you're thinking, oh, this will be interesting to see kind of where they go with that. And then they don't go as far with some of these characters as I would have thought they would in this book, but I'm hoping by now there's already a Peter David Supergirl Volume 4, so I'm really hoping that we can see some of these characters kind of grow and see where they will go in those volumes. For example, Supergirl's roommate, she's involved in an interesting story here, and I would really like to see what that does to her character in future volumes. Also, I really like Supergirl's parents. They're very interesting. One thing I don't really like about this book is that Peter David kind of falls in the trap of portraying religious people as being really stupid. He portrays Supergirl's mom, or Linda Danvers' mom, as just being really dumb and naive, and like everyone who doesn't believe in God kind of acts like they're so much smarter than her. And I am religious myself, so I don't ever really like seeing that in media, in entertainment. It seems to happen a lot. Just once, I would like to see a religious character who isn't a complete naive idiot like Linda's mom is portrayed as here. She doesn't really have any intelligent qualities about her like Linda's dad. Linda's dad is also very grumbly and very grouchy perpetually, and you have to wonder what brought these two together. They don't seem to have anything in common. He doesn't seem to share any of her religious beliefs, so it makes you wonder, why did these two get married? What is it that brought them together? But I would like to see a little bit more development of her parents. But overall, I really love all the supporting characters in this book. I really love the status quo here of the Matrix alien absorbing this human life force and then becoming a little bit more human. It's really fascinating, and I'm going to be sad to see the status quo end, because right around the time when I was reading comics, first getting into DC Comics, I think, is around the time when they were kind of putting an end to this era of Supergirl. And I know they brought in a potential daughter of Lois Lane and Superman from the future. Her name was Sir El. I remember she was kind of floating around in the comics around the time when I first started getting into DC Comics. So I know that it's going to be too good to be true, and eventually it's going to come to an end. But right now, I am absolutely digging this version of Supergirl, much more than I ever thought I would. So I highly recommend this volume if you haven't read it before. If you like the character of Supergirl, if you like the TV show, and you want to read some good Supergirl stories, this is really nothing like the TV show, but I would still recommend this to anybody looking for some good Supergirl stories. Another Superman book that I read was Superman Escape from Bizarro World. This is a short 3-issue story from shortly after Infinite Crisis. Jeff Johns and Richard Donner, who directed the first Superman movie, They were collaborating on Superman around this time. This is written by them with art by Eric Powell. This is right around the time that Superman Last Son, that introduced Chris Kent, and Superman and the Legion of Superheroes, around the time of those stories. And basically, this is a story that reaffirms that Bizarro is not necessarily a comedic character. Sometimes he can be, but sometimes he can be kind of terrifying, and he can be a little bit menacing and a little bit of a threat. And this story kind of brings back that threatening aspect of the character. Now, the character doesn't mean to be threatening. He's trying to do his own thing. He just happens to be a little bit dangerous, and he's a danger to others without really intending to be. But this does kind of bring back that scary aspect of the character that was kind of missing before the story, and had been missing for a little while. And this also collects a few other short Bizarro stories. A few of them are pre-crisis stories, and then one of them is the first post-crisis story from John Byrne's Man of Steel run. And if you like Bizarro, then obviously you're going to like this book. I really can't stand Bizarro. A lot of times he just drives me crazy. His speech and trying to understand what he means when he talks usually just gives me a headache. Sometimes he talks in backwards speak, sometimes he doesn't. It's very inconsistent a lot of times. I can stand to see Bizarro show up once every 5 years maybe, and that's about it. Fortunately, I don't read enough Superman stories that I see Bizarro that often, but I see him often enough that whenever I do see him, I kind of roll my eyes and I say, oh no, it's Bizarro again. This story, I remember buying this pretty cheap, somewhat recently, just within the last month or so, and for a long time, I was deliberately not buying this. I had bought some of the other Jeff Johns Superman books from around this time. I was deliberately avoiding this one because it was a big Bizarro story, and I just didn't care enough about Bizarro to read this. But what I did not know is that it's not that long of a story. It's only 3 issues long, and then it collects some of the other Bizarro stories of the past. And some of them are okay. One of them has Bizarro Amazo. One of them is a story that's actually kind of sad. It's from the 60s, and it was actually also collected in the Showcase Supergirl volume. But it's a story about Bizarro and Bizarro Lois Lane having a kid. And then we also have the John Byrne reintroduction to the character. So if you like Bizarro and you want to see many different aspects of the character and many different interpretations of him, this is definitely a book that you're going to want to check out. And another Superman book that I read was Superman Unchained. This is a 9-issue miniseries from a few years ago, I think like 2013 or 2014, I think. And this book actually looks really enormously long, but there's a huge chunk of this book that are all covers, and then there's also a extended script for the first issue here. So this is where all the covers start. So there's a lot of this that is not comic book. So if you like looking at covers like that, then you might like this. Usually I'll just kind of glance through them, but I don't really spend a lot of time looking at the covers like that in a book like this. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, wow, that must be like a 12-issue miniseries. No, there's quite a bit of this that's not part of the story. But this is written by Scott Snyder with art by Jim Lee and Dustin Nguyen. And I don't want to talk too much about the plot of this because I knew absolutely nothing about this book going into it. I had heard a lot of people really talk it up whenever it was happening, and I wasn't really sure if I was going to like it because I have read a little bit of Scott Snyder's Batman work, and I thought it was okay, but I didn't think that it was the best thing that I have ever read like a lot of other people thought about Snyder's Batman work. And this, I think, is one of my favorite Superman stories. It is definitely my favorite from post-New 52. So from 2011 forward, I consider all of that to be part of the New 52 reboot. This is definitely my favorite Superman story that I've read from New 52 all the way to the present day. If you go all the way back even beyond the New 52, I would say this is one of my top 5 Superman stories. It's really good. There's a little bit about it that I think could have used another look at, another draft, if you will. Some writing stuff here that I think is a little bit contrived, but overall, I really love how the character of Superman is portrayed here. I like the antagonist that we have here. I like it quite a bit. Now, if I reread it, I might find some more problems with it, but just reading it through once, I thought this was a really fun story. I really liked it. I think that more Superman stories should strive to be like this. The stakes are really high, and despite the stakes being so high, Superman is able to find a way to persevere. That is what I like about this book so much. And Superman feels like Superman. He doesn't feel like some different character that just happens to be wearing Superman's costume. I really love this book quite a bit. I definitely think if you're a fan of Superman, you should definitely check this story out. And then I read a couple of Superman-related books. One of them was Super Sons. This has John Kent, Superman's son, teaming up with Batman's son, Damian Wayne, and this is the first 5 issues of that ongoing series, and I thought this was alright. I really like John Kent, and I really like Damian Wayne, but I've discovered that I do not like them together. I like Damian Wayne when he is paired up with Dick Grayson or Bruce Wayne, or when he's off on his own, like in that Damian Year of Blood miniseries. I really like those stories. I like getting to see Damian interact with characters in the Batman family like Dick Grayson and Bruce Wayne. I don't necessarily like him when he is paired up with John Kent. He is too much of a jerk, too much of just a scumbag whenever he's paired up with John Kent. And likewise, I think John Kent is too much of a whiny brat whenever he's paired up with Damian Wayne. But I like John Kent when he's with Lois and Clark, and I like him when he's with his friend in Shelbyville. I think that's where they live, in Shelbyville. I really like him when he's with those characters, but I don't like him when he's with Damian Wayne. Now, I think if we did a flash forward where we got to see these characters in their 30s, I think that they would have an unbreakable bond of friendship, kind of like Superman and Batman. I think that these two characters would die for each other. They would have just the best bond of friendship that you've ever seen. But right now, looking at them when they are 12 and 13 respectively, they're just whiny brats, both of them, and I really don't care to see them team up with each other. I like Damian, and I like John Kent. I realized reading this book that I don't like them together, and maybe Volume 2 will be a little bit better. Maybe they won't be quite at each other's throats like they were here, where they're both just so insufferable, and I just want to see both of them get killed by the bad guy. It wasn't quite that bad, but I didn't enjoy this book nearly as much as I thought I would, since I enjoy both of these characters by themselves with their respective supporting players. But I found reading this that I really don't like them teamed up with each other, and I guess maybe I had roots of that in that Superman volume where these two characters met each other. I think that was maybe Volume 2 of the Superman Rebirth run, but I still think that I like that even more than I like this. Maybe because Superman was more at the forefront, and we were still getting a lot of that relationship with John Kent and Superman, and Damian Wayne, while he was there, it wasn't the forefront of that book. So anyway, if you like these characters together, then you will probably like this book a lot more than I did. But if you like these characters separately, and you're not sure how you feel about them teaming up with each other, then you might want to go into this a little trepidatious. Maybe Volume 2 is going to be better. I'm not sure if I'm going to read Volume 2. I'm still kind of on the fence about it after having kind of a lukewarm reaction to this volume. And then I had another World's Finest team-up book that I recently bought. This is Huntress and Power Girl. This series was called World's Finest, and this is a spin-off of the Earth 2 series. At the end of last year, I spent like 2.5 weeks talking about all the Earth 2 books from the New 52, and this is kind of a spin-off from that. We got to see in Volume 1 that Robin and Supergirl from Earth 2, they were accidentally teleported to our Earth during a crucial battle against Darkseid's forces, and then we get to see that they were teleported to the main DC universe of the New 52 5 years ago, and we get to see them trying to establish new lives for themselves on this world while also trying to get back to their home planet. And I really love that premise. I love the idea of a couple of superheroes who are on a strange and foreign world, and there are parts of it that are very familiar to them, but there are parts of it that are nothing like their home, and then they're trying to get used to that, but they're still trying to get back home. I love that premise. Unfortunately, that's about all that you get here. You get that premise, but you don't get much of a story here. We get to see a whole lot of these characters struggling with this world, trying to fit in, trying to build new lives for themselves, while also trying not to get too comfortable because they do want to go back home. We get to see a whole lot of that, and not much else. Power Girl does fight this giant radioactive monster that is trying to prevent them from going home, and we don't get a whole lot of development of that plot. We find out that something came with them from Earth 2 to this world. We don't know what it was. Possibly that thing is directing this monster that Power Girl fights in this book. His name was Haku, I think, and we find out for some reason maybe he's trying to prevent them from going home, but we don't really get a whole lot of plot here other than these two are living on a world that they don't want to be on, and they're trying to go back home. I really love that premise, but I would have liked to have seen much more done with it than what we had here. It jumps around a little bit too much for my taste. It'll say something happened 49 months ago, and then we'll have something that happened just a few weeks ago, and then we'll have something happening in the present day, and then we will have all these different sections of the book that are drawn by different artists. We'll have sections that are just Power Girl and Huntress when they're in costume. We'll have sections that are Karen and Helena when they're not in costume. volume. Then we'll have a section that's just Helena, and we'll have a section that's just Power Girl. And there's like 4 different artists who are working on all these issues here. And I like quite a few of the artists. I like George Perez. I like Kevin Maguire. I like several of these artists. There's one of them, Jerry Ordway. I like all of these artists quite a bit. There's none of the artists here that I think are really turning in bad work, but it's very jarring when I keep turning the page and it feels like every 2 pages it's a new artist who's doing a new thing here. That's a little jarring. I wish that it was a little bit more artistically consistent here. So I don't know if I will keep reading the series. It ended a while back. I like the premise. I just wish that they were actually doing something with the premise here. So anyway, those are all the books that I read last week. Quite a few of them. I don't know if I will be reading as many books this week. I pretty much knocked out all of the Superman books that I had left that I had not read. I still have a few other Superman books. Most of them are part of the New Krypton storyline from several years ago, and I was going to spend a week trying to read what I had left of that run that I had not yet read, and then I found out that I was actually missing a volume. So I'm not going to be reading the New Krypton stuff for a while until I buy that volume that I am missing. So who knows what I'm going to be reading this week. I will find out, and you guys will find out later on. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.